Good afternoon, everyone. We are blessed and excited to have Stephen Mosher here. Stephen runs the Population Research Institute. He has done so much work for the Catholic cause, the patriotic cause. He is all things expert on China. He has worked with President Trump, and he is also, most importantly, I'm sure, as you would say, Stephen, the father of 9 children. Correct?
Correct.
Including one who serves in the U.S. military as a major stationed right now overseas near the Ukrainian border. Stephen, thanks for coming on the show today.
It's great to be with you again, John. And I just want to let you know how much my wife and I enjoyed the Mar-a-Lago event that Catholics for Catholics organized with you at the head a few weeks ago in beautiful sunny Florida. It was a great event and much needed organization that you're leading.
Thank you, Steve. I mean, we really play off each other. I mean, we're all in similar circles, and just knowing we can go forward with this boldness because other people have explored issues like, for instance, and the topic of the day, communism, right? So
Right.
for us to go into Mar-a-Lago and basically really frame the night as a choice between two systems, communism and the American way of life. The latter represented by Donald Trump, the former by President Biden / President Obama, right, in the socialist regime. Just to know that, like, okay, we can frame these two nights, and there's a historical, data, intellectual backup to come down hard and say communism, yes, it's been condemned by Holy Mother Church through countless encyclicals, but statistically and historically, as you show so well in your own research in this latest book, that the communism leaves a path of destruction. So knowing that allows us to go forward in our own way. So team effort, grateful for that. So Steve, talk to us about this new book, The Devil in Communist China.
Well, it started when I was in China in 1979 as first American social scientist on the ground there. I was there when the one-child policy began. I was in the heart of darkness. I was behind the bamboo curtain when no one had gone before for 30 years. And I was in the operating room when they were forcibly aborting women who were 9 months pregnant and killing babies at birth. So I became aware of the existence of evil. And people listening to that who are cradle Catholics say, well, evil has always existed. We know that evil exists and evil has a name. Well, of course it does. But I was an agnostic. I'd been at Stanford University teaching at the University of California at Berkeley. I was lost. I thought everything was shades of gray. I thought morals were relative and ethics was situational. And here I was confronted with an absolute evil, the killing of an innocent, full-term baby almost at birth, who'd done nothing to deserve the death sentence, a tiny daughter of Adam, a daughter of Eve, a tiny son of Adam. And there they were, assembly line killings done by the Chinese Communist Party, which left the women devastated, their children killed, and the families destroyed. That evil is what led me into the Catholic Church, kind of, you might say, through the back door. You see, when you realize that evil exists, then you begin to seek the good if you have any sense. And if you seek the good, you'll be led to God Himself. So, so communism, for me, especially in its Chinese communist iteration, has always been the world's best exemplar today of evil. And it's an evil that look, if we're not aware of it, John, as you are, and Catholics for Catholics are, if we're not aware of it, then it will come here. It is already creeping into our system. We already have young people who declare themselves to be communist or socialist, not really knowing that that's just a fantasy propagated by power-hungry men, lust for power, who believe they can use this fantasy to create a following and then seize power forever. And communism is a hateful ideology. Our faith is based on love, right? Love of God and love of neighbor. Communism is based on the opposite. It is based on hatred of God and hatred of one's fellow human beings. Mao Zedong, said it best, expressed that hatred best. He said that communism is not love. He said communism is a hammer that we use to crush the enemy. Well, they've been crushing the enemy in communist China ever since the beginning of the communist revolution. They killed about 100 million Chinese after birth. Before birth, over the last 40 years in the one-child policy, they've killed about 400 million more. The total death toll caused by the killingest man in human history, Mao Zedong, And the biggest killing machine in human history, the Chinese Communist Party, is 500 million people, a half billion people. That's an astonishing number. Uh, so that's what and I know you too, want to prevent coming here, and it's already creeping in. It's already creeping in.
Absolutely, it is. You're when you were mentioning about Mao, I actually had the chance to go to visit China. I spent about a month over there, and yeah, first in Hong Kong, and then went across the border. And I remember we actually visited a community of lepers, believe it or not, and we went in there. I remember going into one of the houses, and this is whatever 2013, and inside the house was a picture of Mao. And I saw that. It was a double take. It was like, are you kidding me? I mean, this is like, hasn't the research been done? Don't these people know that this guy was the murderer? And yet you still have, the people were, salt of the earth, amazing people there in the house. But like to have that, it's like, the brainwash just blew me away right there.
Yeah, they don't know because they're not told. And in fact, the Chinese Communist Party, amazingly enough, get this, published a secret directive in 2013 when you were in China, by the way, directive number 9 of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, which says that an accurate account of the history and the ideology of the Chinese Communist Party is a mortal peril. It's a mortal threat to the continued rule of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, why would an accurate account of the history be a mortal threat to Chinese Communist continued rule? Well, obviously because they've killed 100 million people, 400 million more babies. If you told the Chinese people what a killing spree the Communist Party has been on since almost its founding, they would draw back in horror. But they're not told. They're only told about the great advances that have been made over the last few decades, about China has become a modern country with a modern economy, with a first world military. They're not told that all of China's advances are a result of the hard work and the entrepreneurial ability of the Chinese people themselves. And the Communist Party has only been an anchor, an albatross, a millstone around their neck, preventing the Chinese people not just from enjoying freedom, but from joining the ranks of the nations that are free and really part of the first world. So no, the history is a fabrication. The ideology is a fantasy as well, right? The government's never going to fade away. The party is never going to dissolve itself. People are never going to be equal. That's just a fantasy intended to induce the young and the naive and the innocent to follow China. We have in the United States, however, a lot of people who are innocent and naive and easily deceived. And we think in that context about the young, right, who are being miseducated, but also among Christians and Catholics. We Catholics love our neighbor. We love the Chinese people. We love all of humanity. We understand that we're fundamentally equal because we all have souls, right? So those differences between, groups, ethnicities disappear in the face of our overwhelming commonality. We share and will share one day in the life of God. Um, that belief leads us to gloss over the evils of the Chinese Communist Party, and it enables the Chinese Communist Party to say, when we criticize them, that you're being racist. You're attacking China. We're not at all. But that innocence, that naivete, that ability for the Chinese Communist Party to deceive us is something they use. Communist Party leaders have told me when I was in China that Americans are innocent, naive, and easily deceived. And they've been deceiving us from the beginning of the opening to China, and they're still trying to deceive us today. And we've got to be as wise as serpents in combating that. That's why I wrote the book. You have to know exactly what you're dealing with if you're dealing with communist China.
It's awesome, and it even pairs with what we mentioned there back in Florida, Mar-a-Lago, a couple weeks ago. The power to name your enemy, and I think just the book title alone, it grabs your attention. You are naming that it's devil and communist China. You're not mincing words, and when you name it, you have so much more power, both spiritually and philosophically. And I think that's what people appreciate. Why many people are buying the book. Switching to how China has specifically, we all know it's pretty obvious that they've extended. In China, we mean communist China has extended. The CCP has extended their their paws, their hands all over the world in this country. Let's talk about how it's gone into the Catholic Church. And a couple specific questions there, which I'd love for you to comment on. When I first heard you talk a few years ago, you gave a presentation, and it was right when there were rumors of the China-Vatican Accord, right? Which Secretary of State Parolin, right, signed with Chinese Communist nation. Did we ever get any more detail? We never got the actual text, right? But can we confirm that there was a monetary transaction?
Well, it turns out,
Anyway,
okay, I just wrote an article about this, which was published today, because the news came out of the Vatican that the Vatican was getting ready to extend the Sino-Vatican agreement for another 2 years. And I sat back and I said, wait a minute, there is no Sino-Vatican agreement. And I say that as someone who, in June of 2018, sat down with Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Cardinal Secretary of State, who was negotiating the agreement with China, right? And he wanted to talk to me because I was, a China hand, someone who's familiar with the operations of the Chinese Communist Party. And I told him that the Chinese Communist Party was only interested it would only be interested in using any agreement to crush the Catholic Church in China. I told him that Chairman Mao, for example, years ago had said that he regarded all Chinese and missionaries in China, Catholic and Christian, as terrorists, as Nazis, and wanted them out of China. The historical animosity of communism in general, Marxist Leninism towards Christianity and God cannot be exaggerated, right? The fundamental basis of communism is hatred of God. It overwhelms their political and their ideological pretensions. At base, it is a godless and lawless system of tyranny over humanity. So I told him these things. There's no point in signing the agreement. He listened to me. He was very polite and very diplomatic. He's only done that for his entire life. He's been in the Vatican Diplomatic Corps for 40 years. At the end of it, however, my heart fell because he said, well, the agreement is already negotiated. We're just waiting for the Chinese side to sign it. That's the punchline. The Chinese side has never signed it. He admitted as much last year when the Chinese Communist Party installed Bishop Shanbin in Shanghai without telling the Vatican in advance what they were doing. The Vatican went silent for 3 months, and then finally Pope Francis recognized him as the Bishop of Shanghai because he said he didn't want to leave the flock in Shanghai without a shepherd. So, in other words, the Communist Party ran roughshod over the Vatican. The Pope installed their own puppet in Shanghai, and the Vatican was forced to acknowledge him as bishop. And at that time, Cardinal Parolin was asked, why can't we see the terms of the agreement? He said, well, we're still negotiating the agreement. There is no agreement. A Chinese side has never signed the agreement. How can you talk about an agreement? An agreement means you have a contract, a compact, some sort of legal document that both sides have signed and agreed to abide by. No, what you have is the pretense on the part of people in the Vatican that the Chinese Communist Party is going to abide by some verbal understanding. So the Vatican has made all sorts of compromises to the Chinese Communist Party. Communist Party has not reciprocated.
I don't get that though. Like, all right, so what do they get out of it? If that was the Vatican, I mean, it's like you sign a DocuSign over to somebody, you sign the document, they don't sign, the agreement's null and void. Can't you just like the Vatican just take back its what it said it would do?
Well, and this agreement supposedly this supposed agreement, which doesn't exist in any sense that common sense would tell you an agreement even can be defined. It's been extended now twice. It's about to be extended for the third time, which is basically the Vatican rolling over and telling the Chinese Communist Party, okay, you know what we'd like to do. You're not willing to go along with it, but we're going to continue to dialogue with you. That's all we hear from the Vatican. We're going to dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. Well, the Chinese Communist Party will talk to you forever because that is the strategy they use to advance their cause. They will talk to you to hamstring you, to keep you silent, to keep you hopeful. All the while, they advance their own agenda, which is to infiltrate and co opt and control the Catholic Church in China with the ultimate end of either converting it into part of the communist cult or crushing it entirely.
You know, it is puzzling that the Secretary of State of the Vatican of the Roman Catholic Church reaches out to you for advice after sending the deal. I mean, obviously, you'd think he would have asked you before. He was very much interested. You know, what would that be? It actually reminds me a little bit about when Pope Francis asked Cardinal Vigano, Archbishop Vigano, "What do you think about McCarrick?" He didn't really want his advice. He just wanted to know where he stood on him. I don't know, unless you have an insight. I mean, or he was outsmarted, outwolfed, and he needed help, so he reached out to the expert.
Yeah, it's puzzling to me, and I think that the agreement exists only in the minds of Chinese Vatican officials, who Pope Francis was very eager to negotiate it many years ago. I mean, that was one of his goals, I think, when he came to occupy the throne of Peter. And we know that McCarrick was communicating and with Pope Francis, and was actually going as an emissary to China to negotiate the terms of the agreement 10 years ago.
Has that been really? I
Yes,
know we've heard that like we've
yes.
seen that. We've seen the stat.
That is
Okay.
that is absolutely correct, because we have that from Cardinal McCarrick, former Cardinal McCarrick, defrocked, laicized Cardinal McCarrick, we'll call him from now on. McCarrick's secretary in Rome for 20 years revealed the correspondence between McCarrick and Francis. And in that correspondence, you have McCarrick saying, "I'm going to China for you. I will fulfill the great dream of Matteo Ricci to bring you China." So we know that it got off to a bad start, the negotiations, right? Who would you send? I mean, the last person you would send to China to negotiate an agreement was someone who was corrupt in the way that McCarrick was corrupt, because the Chinese Communist Party is past master at using honeypots, at using drugs, at using money to corrupt people. And I'm afraid that McCarrick, as we know, was easily corrupted and busy corrupting others.
People, okay, unfamiliar with this, watching this, will watch this show. You need to remember some Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the disgraced former cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church, who is responsible, arguably, with having a personal hand in naming about 20% or more of the U.S. bishops in this country. This guy who was part of the San Gallen Mafia, they named themselves that. That was the group that met beginning in the 90s, 95, to elect the next pope. They had a very liberal, it's a nice word to use, agenda for the church. And this guy, McCarrick, the guy who abused countless boys, right? This is the guy that was the architect of this deal between the Vatican, this so-called deal, this fake deal between the Vatican and China, which sold ourselves out to that, right? So, what about the monetary transaction? You know, the famous like $2 billion mention that there was some sort of a Vatican received a payment. Do we have anything on that? Is that just hearsay?
No, I asked Cardinal George Pell that very question. Cardinal Pell is a longtime friend of mine. I knew him when he was Archbishop of Melbourne, and was going back and forth to China fairly frequently. We met and talked about China on several occasions. I asked him about the possible payments of the Chinese Communist Party to the Vatican, and the Communist Party pays off everybody all the time. we could sit here all day and talk about all the people in America whom they have paid off, sought to pay off, and continue to pay off, including some very high-ranking officials in the Biden administration. But McCarrick um, was was sent there by the Pope. Now, did I ask Cardinal Pell if the Communist Party, there was any evidence while he was there in charge of economic affairs and looking into the finances of the Vatican of payments from China? He said not in the official accounts. He said, but I didn't have access. He said to the private accounts, to the unofficial accounts. So he couldn't confirm that any payments had been made in that kind. But of course, he couldn't deny them either. And I would just say that that would be, if there were payments, that would be typical behavior on the part of the Chinese Communist Party. I've seen videos where senior Communist Party leaders are addressing an audience and saying things like, criticizing America's money bags democracy, saying, we give them one bag of money, and if it's not enough, we give them two bags of money, and that's not enough, we give them three bags of money. The audience was laughing. Why? Because they knew it was true. So this is how they roll. This is how they operate.
And then they steal the money back from us in the end, anyways. So it's okay. How about this for an analogy? continuing on the line of thought with the relationship between the church and China. The Chinese know communism is always known. You got to take out the core tenets or pillars of society, family, the church, etc. So what they did, obviously, we know in the Catholic Church in China, they have the nationalist church, okay, right, which the patriotic church, okay, which is just a puppet church for them, and they use it to control. So how about you look at now in the United States of America? It's the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. No, it's not run by the Chinese communists. Not saying that, but when you look at the amount of money that it takes in from the US federal government through their grant system, which is very hard to really track and see where those grants are being used. We know, of course, lots been used at the southern border, but it almost makes it seem when 40% or more of the budget comes from the federal government. There, I asked Jack Posobiec the same question. We were talking about this. It's almost like, would you agree, Stephen, that it's almost like its own form of a nationalist church, right? When you're so tied at the hip to the government, it's like a nationalist church. You do what the government wants you to do. Very akin to what the Chinese communists have done with our Catholic Church in China. Comments on that?
Well, that's obviously true. I mean, we just finished a year-long investigation of Catholic Relief Services activities in Africa in three nations: Zimbabwe, and Lesotho, and Cameroon. And we identified all kinds of problems. That is, the Catholic Relief Services being involved in the promotion of contraception, sterilization, even referring girls for groups that promote abortion and may perform abortions. And why has the Catholic Relief Services, in my view, been compromised in this way? Because they get over $1 billion in funding from the U.S. government. That's three times the amount of money they get from contributions from the pew sitters. And, you know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. So I think that's an obvious point. You follow the money. The best example of that, you know, is not the United States, it's the German church, which we all know is going headlong into the radical down the Martin Luther Road. Once again, we go. The German church survives on the basis not of contributions from pew sitters; they get some still, but it survives on what's called Kirchegeld money, church money. 7% of the taxes that any Catholic pays in Germany goes as a tithe through the government to the Catholic Church. So the church is basically an arm of the German government. No wonder they've gone off into left wing Looneyville.
Absolutely, well said. And I can only imagine, like you worked with the Trump administration a little bit. Did you ever have the chance to present to Trump's or some of the Trump's officials that you're at liberty to say, help them explain this whole situation between the church and China, even the church here in the United States with the government grants or the case you just mentioned? Those conversations ever come up?
Well, I went back and forth with Peter Navarro, who was the economic advisor on trade and tariffs and other issues, and I testified before the China Executive Committee in Congress. Um, but direct conversations with President Trump, no. Um, but that sort of persecution of the church in China is going on in real time now. And this so-called agreement, which I always put in quotes because there is no agreement because the Chinese never signed it. The so-called agreement is nevertheless being used by the Chinese Communist Party as a pretext to force Catholic bishops and Catholic priests and lay people in China into the Catholic Patriotic Association, into the Catholic, so-called Catholic patriotic church run by the Chinese Communist Party. So the Vatican has really created the worst of both worlds for Chinese Catholics. It hasn't wrung any conditions or any concessions from the Chinese Communist Party. On the other hand, its concessions, this faux agreement, have been used to herd Catholic bishops, priests into the patriotic Catholic Church, where they can be monitored, watched, controlled, and ultimately the gospel message can be watered down and souls can be lost.
Explain to me a phrase, Wu Fa Wu Tian. I almost had it memorized.
That's pretty good. The tones are a little off, but the tones in Chinese are hard. It's Wu Fa Wu Tian, and Wu Fa means without law and without heaven. And what Mao Zedong meant when he said that to Edgar Snow back in 1936 was that he was lawless and godless. He was without heaven, without law. He was lawless and godless. I think we should turn that around. We should really say you're godless and lawless, because if you're godless, then you're probably lawless as well over time, because it's hard to maintain morality without belief in God. And that was a true statement. He also made other statements like I'm a person who knows that other things and people exist in the world, but they only exist for my use and my pleasure. Imagine being a person, and it's hard for a Catholic too, because we're told to love God and love our neighbor, and we recognize our common humanity. Imagine a person who went around looking at other people only as objects to be used, just like things, right? Just like a car is meant to be used, so other people are meant to be used. So he treated his fellow human beings in China just as objects to be used, and he was totally callous towards their life and death. He had no respect for life, of course. He killed many. And when tens of millions of people were dying in the famine that he created by his mismanagement of the agricultural economy in the commune period, tens of millions of Chinese were dying from 1960 to 1962. He said, what does it matter if one third of the population dies? Their bodies will fertilize the soil. Their bodies will fertilize the soil. He thought of the tens of millions of Chinese he had killed as nothing more than human compost, as human fertilizer. What a despicable person he was. So I lay out that the evil that was Mao, and was he possessed by the devil? Uh, I don't know, but he certainly behaved as if he were. And the question I asked was, would he do anything differently? Would he have done anything differently if he was possessed by the devil? And the answer is probably not. Probably not.
And the reason we're talking about a 20th century dictator from the 1930s, everyone, again, it's the reality that, and Stephen's doing this point, is that ideology, that demonic with demonic roots, is at our country's border, literally, right? I mean, we've had so many Chinese nationals come to the border. Not everyone's obviously an armed soldier, right? But that does need to be asked. But the culture has penetrated, and it's all around us. And all right, shut this down. Really, what's your elevator speech for socialism? Is how does it relate to communism? Can socialism be okay, or is it just soft communism?
Socialism is supposedly communism without the violence, but they both end in tyranny. They both end in one party dictatorships. They both end in the loss of freedom, freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. At the end of the day, man's lust for power without the recognition of the authority of God is unquenchable, and will continue to the end of a total enslavement of the population. That's why we can't go down the socialist road to ruin. We've seen the massive death toll that comes from socialism and communism. And by the way, people need to know that the Communist Party in China says that its ideology is socialism with Chinese characteristics. This is a killing machine that's killed 500 million of their own people, and they regard themselves as socialist with Chinese characteristics. So, yeah, avoid at all cost.
They're the ultimate party of death, and we see so much similarity in the Democrat Party today with the party of death, right? One final question: we're releasing this video on May 1st. Remind of the audience the significance of May 1st. Why is it significant for the Chinese Party, communism rather, and our own Catholic faith?
Well, May 1st is Labor Day. May 1st is the high holy day of the Communist Party. It's the day in which they pretend to celebrate workers. Yeah. And of course, what communist parties and communist systems like that which governs China really do, of course, is they enslave workers. Workers in China are not free to organize. They're not free to form labor unions. If you try that in China, you're arrested and sent to prison. They're not free to engage in slowdowns on the assembly line to strike for higher wages. When they try that, they're met in the streets with deadly force by the police or the military. So the whole pretense that communism exists for the masses is again a fantasy. But communism is a fantasy used to control the masses, and no one did it better than Chairman Mao Zedong and his current clone Xi Jinping, who is not the son of Mao's loins, but he's the son of Mao's spirit, and he's emulating Mao in all things. And we have leaders in the United States who are equally, I think, godless and lawless. They've been constrained so far by the great American middle class, by the number of believers that we have in this country who respect nature and nature's God. They've been constrained by what's left of the Constitution and the rule of law. But make no mistake, they are relentless, they are deadly, and they will not give up until they are absolutely defeated.
We are absolutely grateful for what you're doing. Population Research Institute, you run that, and the books you are writing as Catholics. Again, if you're watching this, you are a Catholic. The responsibility to be aware and fight back at what is going on is twofold. Number one, we as a universal church, we should be much more cognizant that our Catholic brothers in China are suffering so much. That should wake the heck up out of you and get you out and get you moving and become an activist. And secondly, we have the grace of the sacraments and the knowledge of our own history where the church has condemned this. So Stephen is a Catholic, great Catholic. I'm friends with a lot of his friends, Michael Hitchborn, Lepanto Institute. As we started off the show saying, we do support each other. So go and buy this book. You need to. Catholics for Catholics wants to be behind Catholics in the public square who are making a difference, and Stephen is doing just that. Of course, obviously pray for him and the good work that he's doing for protection on his family, and also his son is deployed. Stephen, thank you for your time, sir, and we look forward to having another round of talking.